into dysfunctional versus pathological. And why haven't we recognized it sooner? And I always say, I think it has, I call it being psychopathology, sort of being the foster child of theory, or Cinderella's ugly sister syndrome. There's something about that issue about psychopathology that I think has been difficult for us to bring what we know to the table and this type of differentiation between dysfunctional and pathological. For instance, in DV, marriage and family, battery intervention, anger management, hasn't always differentiated, or maybe had the data to know to differentiate that what a narcissist or psychopath may do to others may be more dangerous than what other non-pathological and yet even physically violent partners may do, despite what the field of psychopathology actually knows about these dangerous personality pathologies. So it seems like as a field, we've not always welcomed the understanding of personality and psychopathology into relational dynamic understanding, sort of beyond the understanding of, the 1960s DV theory. We haven't brought the updated knowledge of what we know about this to the table. So it's been a slow go to integrate psychopathology and personality science and their influences into the existing frameworks about relationship theory and relational trauma. We have broadly accepted violence in a macro sense, but not in a micro sense, of the spectrum of high psychopathology and its different needs across all areas of understanding. And this is evidenced by the lack of existing research. And then there's politics and theory bias. As I said when we first began, this is not a new field or theory. It's sort of been an ignored theory for lots of political reasons, including from the largest influential relational harm theory, domestic violence. Some of those political beliefs from large systems are that PDs are an excuse for violence, which has closed the door on psychopathology science and its contribution to prevention and prediction in everything from recidivism to lethality. And as we'll see, they aren't an excuse. They are documented risks, from studies on recidivism to criminal populations to sadism to psychopathy. There is a danger zone related to personality pathology and victim risk. So the Institute, before the book came out, some of the reasons we missed, seeing it, I think societally, and part of the reasons we studied it, have a broader implication to lots of disciplines within the field. I'm just going to read through these quickly because it's in the whole front section of the psychopath book. And what I want to get to are the three top reasons survivors have pointed out about treatment failure related to us. So these are big societal reasons: lack of public pathology education, lack of professional pathology education, lack of research about these victims getting differentiated from a wide generalized domestic violence population, a lack of awareness in victim and abuser services who don't always differentiate for victim treatment or abuser treatment. Certainly until we've started talking, about this over the last couple of decades, there was a lack of classification of pathological love relationships. The survivor's trauma is often atypical. That's why we can miss it due to the level of psychopathology they've been exposed to. And zero, a lot of research dollars to this topic in comparison to millions of research dollars a year that is put into psychopathy, but not psychopathy victims. So there's been a lot that hasn't been out there for us to be able to recognize and differentiate this. Consequently, we failed in survivor treatment when pathological relationships aren't acknowledged or understood. So let's focus on the main reasons. The Institute did a study called Finding Competent Care, and the FCC, not that one, our own FCC. And what we learned about what we didn't see or apparently know enough about. So the Institute data collected over decades of treating survivors, which revealed this consistent pattern of previous failed treatments related to the same kind of repeating topics or approaches that the survivors all mentioned. And so to dive deeper, the Institute created a study to find what treatment failures were related to specifically by surveying hundreds of PLR survivors. And what they said were the main reasons for failed treatment. So the outcomes of the FCC study then were used to create our model of care treatment approach that corrected the previous deficits that had led to such widespread treatment failure. And the outcomes of the Institute's data collections became the psychoeducational training materials that we use with therapists, that we have been training therapists for 14 years now. So why we miss it? So this is from the mouth of babes, from the study via the survivors. So we previously listed, the broad-based sort of societal reasons why PLRs are missed. Now we're going to focus on 3 reasons that were most important to the survivors from the study. So the number 3, third top reason, is the reason we just discussed, that we haven't differentiated. So these relationships are often undifferentiated from other dysfunctional and abusive relationships. And it assumes that the abusers are the same, and the relational dynamics, and the survivor profile, and the resulting trauma, and the treatment approaches. Therefore, we tend to lump them together and use other approaches appropriate for other populations, but not focused on the studied differences in these survivors. The number 2 problem, most identified, that led to treatment failure was their trauma. So the Institute also did a trauma study, and it indicated that 75% of this population have or will develop a trauma disorder. But shockingly, many were never diagnosed with trauma for two main reasons. Now, we go into this into a lot more detail, talking about the diagnosis, etc., in our other workshops, but I want you to be aware of these, so we're just going to mention them. The survivor's trauma presented as atypical, and that's been such a big issue. And we spend, a whole segment focusing on this unusual atypicality presentation. So that atypical presentation made the therapist think it was not trauma, but some other kind of diagnosis. Therefore, many were not assessed for trauma at all. And then the second, for those who did get assessed, they did not always meet criteria A, for instance, in PTSD. But if you went past A, they met all the other criteria. And they were ruled out for trauma when they were not assessed beyond criteria A. So be aware of that. Please be aware. So consequently, survivors were never trauma treated, especially for the atypicality, which turned out to be their most pressing trauma symptom. And the number one reason, so they took us to the woodshed on this, I have to say. The number one reason survivors named for failed treatment hinged on our own training. Yikes. So it seems that at the center of this has been our measly little grad school psychopathology class. Maybe you went to a better school or more recent and had better than I had, but it seems that the majority of us didn't get what we need for this kind of work. So most therapists who attempted to treat survivors only had minimal classes about psychopathology and specifically personality disorders. And when they had those classes, it did not focus on relational dynamics and harm. It was, the symptoms of the disorders. And so the bottom line is they were attempting to treat a survivor whose trauma was based on someone else's psychopathology when they did not have an adequate or an updated understanding about the disorders doing the impact. And so it became this trickle down. We're going to look at a number of reasons that are connected to that number one lack of training for this population. And it trickled down into a number of other problems related to that. So one of the related problems, consequently, is that if you don't specialize in personality disorders or psychopathology, it's probably not a CE topic that you take. You tend to, take stuff that expands the area that you work in. And a lot of the therapists, that I've taught over the years has said they had no idea when they first took